Hello, and welcome back to the Guns on Pegs podcast. My name is George Brown, and I'm the editor at Guns on Pegs. I'm joined, as usual, by my co-host Chris Horn, managing director of Guns on Pegs. Right, Chris, the day this episode goes out is the 1st of September, so some lucky partridge shots and wildfowlers will be in action.
It's such an exciting day, because obviously this year as well, the glorious 12th, there's a bit of a damp squib, wasn't it, sadly. So I think this year, even more importantly, the 1st of September is kind of season proper, isn't it? And it also is the time when, grouse you've got to be quite fortunate to be on the grouse even in a good year. So it's the time when everyone now has an opportunity to get out. So yeah, very exciting.
Yeah, and you know this about me, Chris. I absolutely love partridge shooting. So I think that's one of the reasons I always get excited about the 1st of September. And how about this for a seamless link? It's also why I'm so excited about this episode. Do you want to tell us about our guest today?
Indeed. So our guest today owns and runs the 6,500 acre Stockton shoot in southwest Wiltshire. And having grown up there as a boy, he spent part of his career in the city before heading back out to develop what was then the sort of family shoot into something a little bit more substantial nowadays, maybe slightly more impressive than the little family shoot. There's a high chance you would have read some of his rather interesting thoughts in some of the shooting magazines over the years. He's hugely passionate about shooting and also very keen on looking after the future of it. So a very warm welcome to Barney Stratton.
Evening, gentlemen. Thank you for having me on.
Good to have you with us.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure.
George, so partridge shooting is is it your favourite, George? So you've kicked that out straight off. So when we do 1st of October, we talk about pheasants. It's your second favourite.
Yeah, I mean, I love pheasant shooting as well, but we mostly shoot partridges at home, and I think maybe they're a bit underappreciated, perhaps.
So Barney, is therefore partridge shooting your most favourite form of shooting?
Well, nearly. I mean, I still think driven grouse does beat partridge shooting, but I think, as you just said, you have to be very fortunate or very rich to do that. So we're not all necessarily in that category. And I think that for lowland shooting, there is nothing more exciting than sort of partridges, big lots of partridges coming over, on a nice wind. I think it's just a really great. It's a great thing to do. I love being under them, and I love putting them over the guns.
We're going to get back to a lot of partridge chat in a minute, but I do have, every time it gets round to the different stages of the season, I always find myself saying, oh yeah, partridge shooting really is my favourite. Then it gets sort of January and I'm like, I don't think you can beat a bit of pheasant shooting. And, in August, you're sort of like, there's nothing better than grouse. I think it just depends on the sort of time of year. You just go with it.
You do, but you see, we do partridges all the way through the season. And, in January, when they're still not a particularly big part of the of the bout. They're still quite a large part on some of our beats. Those partridges, they are just such good game birds. They're coming right early or right at the beginning, and the pheasants all run down to the end, and some beater's dog gets their nose into their bush, and out they come. But the partridges, they're just doing it all through the year. They're just such great game birds.
It's so true.
Now, Chris, before we go on, first of all, we've got to say a huge thank you to Barney just for joining us today, because he's actually, Barney, you're not on a stalking holiday in Scotland, so you've taken time out of your holiday to come and join us. But Barney, presumably you've had a fantastic day out on the hill already today, have you?
We've had a fantastic day. I mean, the weather up here is just hot and still, and for the stalkers, it's a nightmare. I mean, they're really struggling to find the stags. They're just so far out getting away from the midges. So we spent the day in about 20-degree heat scrabbling around on the side of a mountain up on the northwest coast of Scotland called Foinhaven, which those who are interested in national hunt racing will know as a famous or maybe even infamous winner of the Grand National, named after this mountain. The stags weren't hugely cooperative. One of my youngest sons, my oldest son was supposed to be shooting. We didn't quite manage to catch up with one, but we had the most amazing day. And I just love stalking. I love being out. I love seeing what you do. I love talking to the stalkers. And actually, the interesting thing I thought, and as we sort of trundled back the Cat, and the stalker was a little bit, he was a bit downcast. They're having a tough week. Was normally it's my job being on that side of the fence when you haven't quite delivered the day's sport that your guests have paid for, and it's fascinating. It's such good experience being on the other side. Not that I had any problems at all with how things went today, but just being a good, gracious guest when things don't go well is so important. And let me say, I thoroughly appreciated in my guests when we haven't quite turned on the afterburners on our shooting as perhaps we'd like to, and they all say, "Oh, we still had a lovely day," and I think, well, you lying toad, but I love you for it.
That's so true. It's difficult. Well, with the managing the shoot aspect, we'll definitely get back to. But yes, I can imagine being the other side. So did you blank then today? I missed that bit.
Well, we didn't get a stag, no.
Yeah, 20 degree on the west coast of Scotland. It's warmer than Kent. What's going on this year? It's gone mad. Like, it's been dry up there, and down here it's been cold and wet the whole time.
Yeah, no, it's just sort of coincided. With this week, I think, just looking at the weather forecast as I do obsessively, there's a high pressure sitting over northwest Scotland, and we've got almost no wind, and the midges are loving it. And but it's fantastic views, and it's just wonderful being there. And they said early part of the season, they've just been really misty, murky weather. So we've got glorious sunshine. You can't complain. And luckily, this is a podcast, not a video cast, so you wouldn't see how terribly red my face is, having been windburned and sunburned up halfway up Foinhaven Mountain.
Well, Barney, after a hard day yomping over mountain, you're probably in need of a drink. So why don't you tell us what's that you're drinking?
Well, indeed. It's actually a little bit complicated because being up here, the drink supply is a little bit more limited than it would be down at home. So what I think I'll talk about is what I would have if I was at home, because I've always been one of these people who's struggled not to have a drink every day. And, when we do the sort of doctors do the medical, and they say, "Well, Mr. Stratton, how many units do you normally drink a week?" And you say, 18. They know that's sort of 28 or 38. But when we got to this November, the last November lockdown, I woke up on the morning of the 5th of November thinking, I've got nothing to do for 4 weeks. There was genuinely no reason to get out of bed. I couldn't. There was nothing I needed to do on the shoot. There was no marketing. There was just, most people run around trying to pivot their businesses and do all sorts of stuff in lockdowns to try and sort of keep the wolf from the door. And I had nothing to do. And I sort of tried to work out what my sort of goals were going to be for the next 4 weeks to sort of give myself a bit of focus. And one was to do a whole lot of long distance walks because, I'm about to start a guided walking business to sort of run along the side of the shooting, outside the shooting season. And I also thought, this is a really good opportunity to try a dry lockdown. And I've never done it. I never do dry January. I never do no drinking in Lent. I just can't do it. I thought, right, here's a challenge. Let's do it. But the big problem we all have, I always have had, is there's nothing I like to drink that is non-alcoholic. Elderflower and fizzy water gets me through the shooting season, but, shooting lunches. But, you don't really want to sit down and drink that in the evening. And I tried a number of things. The one thing I really liked is a tomato juice, a spicy tomato juice made by a company called Turner Hardy, who... and one of the guys, Hugo Hardman, came shooting with us years ago when we served, as our default Bloody Mary mix, a well-known alternative brand of ready mixed. Chris is nodding on the Zoom. He's clearly an aficionado. And he said, I'm going to make another version of this. It's going to be better. And I thought, okay, fine. Let me know when you bring it out. And heard nothing for a few years, and then he rang me and said, "Right, I'm coming. I've got it ready. You're coming to do a tasting." And it's really nice, and so I now it's. I mean, one thing they do, they use fresh tomatoes from the Isle of Wight. It's just really good drink, and we now stock it on the shoot. And I I sat down with a pint of chilled Turner and Hardy lively tomato juice in lockdown, and I just love it. And now I've actually become a bit of a non-drinker, and I've rather discovered the joys of not drinking, which is quite troubling at my age. But just to reassure you and your listeners that I'm not just becoming an old prude, there is actually another drink that I like, which happens. I've become a real fan of English lagers and English sort of pale ales. I just think it. They just. I am so glad. I've never been a great one for hoppy beers, and I just love these light, light ales. English lagers. They got a bit of bite to them, and the neighbouring farmer is between all our shoots. His sons have set up a brewery which is called Blonde Brothers, and they make a really nice lager from organic hops from their farm, and probably a few others around. And I'd sort of tried this because, like with Turner Hardy, like with lots of other brands, I love serving brands on the shoot that have a connection, either, preferably with somebody I know, or if it's somebody who shoots, we do a lot of Corsten Press, drinks we do. I'm trying to think of, what else we do. I really like getting stuff from people who are known to me or are shooting people, because we probably have 2,000 people through our shoot, what with the clay days. And it's quite a good way of, promoting brands. So naked plug here, if there's anybody out there who listens to this and shoots and has got some brand or some product that you would like a bit of exposure, on Shoot 11's Shoot Lunch, then, do get in touch.
Got to love a plug like that, George. That's impressive. That was.
That's what the podcast's for.
Indeed.
Do you know, was it that obvious?
It was beautiful.
These guys, the Blonde Brothers, I sort of happened to be in a pub with their dad, and he ordered, he said, do you serve my son's beer? And I didn't realise they produced it. So I'd order some. Luckily, I liked it, because it would be really embarrassing, if I did. So I said, we'll get this on the shoot. So that is now our my go-to beer when I'm allowing myself a drink. However, up here in Scotland, when my host said, what do I want to drink? I said, get an English lager, because that's what I want. So he only managed to find Camden, which is another English lager. It's fine. It's nice. The trouble is, everybody else in the lodge found it, and we ran out. So yesterday, I went down to drop somebody at Inverness Airport, and I went into Tesco to get a replen. And of course, Tesco in Inverness is not exactly full of English lagers. But I did manage to find a Camden pale ale. So that is what I'm drinking tonight, because there was no room in the car to bring up a case of Turner Hardy and a case of Blonde Brothers beer. Let me tell you, I tried, but what with 4 dogs, 2 children, 1 wife, and enough kit for one stalking week, we couldn't get those essential supplies in. So I'm enjoying a Camden Pale Ale, and it's after a hot day on the hill, it's going to go down far too quickly.
Good man. It's a good beer as well, though. I like it.
It is, yes.
Chris, have you gone teetotal as well after your week away?
Certainly not. Actually, drank a lot of Greek Santorini wine. Really quite nice, by the way. Another little plug for if you get hands on any of that. I didn't expect it. Really good. No, today I've got a slow gin, and I never mix slow gin with anything. It's usually just on its own, mainly sort of in the field type scenario. But today I've mixed it with tonic, just because I didn't want to just sit here with a slow gin. Now, the slow gin I have is particularly special because it arrived at my door in a little bottle, and on the bottle it says the Wiltshire Liquor Company Blood Orange Liqueurs. Now, it's absolutely not that. But this was a lovely gift from George. So I'm actually drinking George's slow gin that he sent me. George, tell me about what I'm drinking.
Shit. I wish I could. So, I mean, it's funny how these things happen because not only am I drinking one of Camden's other beers, or it's my sort of reserve drink today, I'm also drinking some of my own sloe gin. But the trouble is that I'm not very good at labeling when I make it. And so I couldn't tell you at what point in the last 3 years those sloes were harvested and the gin was made. All I can tell you is that the sloes came from my dad's farm in Hampshire, and that it was probably the 2019 brew, but I couldn't be certain. And
Happy one, a pre-lockdown brew. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Chris, as you'll know, I'm moving house next month, leaving London and heading back out to the countryside. And so I've been sort of looking in all the nooks and crannies of the flat, and I found another Kilner jar that I have failed to bottle.
With sloes, all the sloes still in the bottom. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's equally unlabeled. And again, it's vintage unknown. So I thought, well, I better bottle that because it's easier to move things in bottles than Kilner jars. And I'll give it a go. So that's what I've got today as well. And I promise you, this is a total coincidence, by the way, anybody listening who thinks this is a setup. It's genuinely not. I only found it today. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying it. I've never left. I mean, I don't know how long the sloes were in there for, but definitely longer than they usually are. And I was a little bit worried it might have gone nasty, but it's actually really good.
I was wondering this, like with the sloes, can you leave them too long in the bottom? Because I left mine for 2.5 years accidentally, and they seem fine. Can it be left for too long? Is this something you know about, Barney?
No, I am not a slow drink drinker. I've never really liked it, but I'm feeling hugely uncomfortable with this slow gin conversation because my number two, who my co-host on the shoot, is called John T. Dampney, and he makes his own brand of slow gins and other liqueurs, which I haven't plugged up till now. And now that we are talking about slow gin, he's going to absolutely kill me, and he's 6'7", if I don't mention that he makes a wonderful range of slow gins under the name of Dampney's slow gins and other things. So I thought I'd better get that one in quickly before A, he hits me, and B, to let you guys know that no, it's not my area of expertise. The one thing I hate about slow gin is when people put it in champagne on shoot 11s, but that's another story.
Well, I can absolutely vouch for Jonty's drinks because I've known Jonty for years because we both play for the Hampshire Hogs Cricket Club. And I can tell you that at 6'7", when he comes charging down the hill at Warnford, he put the fear of God into batsmen. But thankfully, his slow gin and other liqueur making skills are rather better than his bowling accuracy, which could be a little bit erratic. But yeah, they're fantastic drinks. They're really good. The rhubarb one is very popular in our household.
So I've just Googled it. Remarkabledrinks.co.uk. Dampney's Remarkable Drinks. There you go. Another
glug.
But on the note of slow gin and tonic, I don't think it's the sort of thing that people mix that much. And it's really good. And I've never really done it. I just never really sat down and had slow gin and tonic. I would just usually have gin and tonic. But double up the amount of gin, essentially, you'd put in it, because it's essentially half the strength. And you get lots of good flavour then. And it's really good. So, yeah, there you go. Right, moving on.
I'm very glad you're enjoying it, Chris. Right, okay. So we're all well lubricated, I think it sounds like. So time to offer out some dubious advice. This is, Barney, the section called Whose Bird Is It Anyway? And it's the part of the podcast where we ask our listeners to send in their shooting quandaries and queries and dilemmas. And we try and offer them some advice on it. So this one comes from somebody who we're calling Clarence. And Clarence writes, "We have a rough shoot in the People's Democratic Republic of Yorkshire, covering approximately 3,000 acres. We release a modest number of birds each year with the aim of creating a hard day's hunting for guns and dogs alike. We venture out in pairs, and on an average day, we could cover 8 miles, and the bragging rights for distance covered are often more hotly contested than bag size. On to my dilemma. This year, I helped the keeper with the birds, and a friend/rival gun has asked where they were released. Do I tell him where the birds roughly are so he can potentially get a bigger bag and fewer miles, or do I send him in completely the wrong direction and allow him the pleasure of a very long armed dog walk with the all-important distance bragging rights? So just a little bit of information here. 3,000 acres is a big patch of ground, as you'll know, Barney. But I just thought for people who want to get a kind of picture of how big that is, if it was a circle, it would be about 2.5 miles across. So it's a big bit of ground.
And how many birds are they releasing?
Well, he doesn't say.
But it can't be many.
A modest number.
So, Barney, if you released a modest number, you have to think back a few years. If you released a modest number of birds on 3,000 acres, and you were sent out to go and find them, what are your chances?
Well, indeed, I think one of the points I would make, and we may even cover this later in the podcast, is that pheasants have this innate ability to just not want to stay around where they're released. I mean, as soon as you let them out of the release pen, they will go down every hedgerow and just do everything they possibly can to get as far away from that release pen as possible. So I think for a start, it's the information of where they're released might not necessarily be that useful. But personally, I think anybody who asks that question, it's like when people ask me how many birds I release. It happens surprisingly often. I mean, it used to be the absolute no. You never ask people how many birds they release. It's like saying how much money they earn. And I think asking them where they release them is sort of in the same category. So I would tend to think that you need to lead him on the wild goose chase or the proverbial wild pheasant chase as a punishment for that sort of temerity.
I'm absolutely with you.
Yeah, absolutely 100% behind you, Barney. I think he's basically trying to cheat, isn't he? Whether it's going to work or not is slightly irrelevant. It's the attitude is give me insider info. It's like insider trading.
Yeah. I mean, it's a cad's game, isn't it?
He wants to go out, shoot all the syndicate's birds, not have to walk very far, just by asking a couple of angled questions. I think there's punishment. We need to go back to the sort of fines episode and dream up a fine for him.
Yeah, Chris, you're absolutely right. Not only do we need to look at fines, but I also think that, yes, he should give the wrong information and the wrong location, send him on the wild goose chase, but also should give serious thought to replacing all of his cartridges with blanks, so that even if he does come across the birds, he inexplicably misses everything.
So basically, we've neatly summarised it. That don't ask how many birds someone releases, and if they do release birds, don't ask them where they release them.
What amuses me is that I'm sort of beginning to think that George's suggestion of replacing his cartridges with blanks is going to be his default answer to just about every "whose bird is it anyway" dilemma. I think he's hit on a gold mine.
Well, it's that or the subtle, the quiet black powder cartridge just to scare the shit out of someone as well.
I love dropping one of those in when people least expect it. Probably shouldn't do that, but it's funny.
You can probably get confetti cartridges, can you?
Must be able to these days. You could load your own, couldn't you?
Load your own.
Yeah. Right. So we've got this new feature called Unpopular Opinions, which debuted last time, I think. And I think it's a bit of a hit. We've had a few in since the last episode, and this one comes in from someone we'll call Rudy. He says on a syndicate day, we've had some good fun with each other with matters tweed. What do you make of the opinion that too much matching kit makes you look like you have all the gear, no idea? Barney, over to you first.
Well, you've asked the wrong person because I love matching tweed. We've just taken delivery today of our second lot of estate tweed. We do a sort of summer one now. So I have just got the bill from Charles Gale Tailoring to fit out all our keepers in a lightweight summer tweed. We also have a winter tweed. But what I was always told, the essential requirement is if you are if you are the boss, you must never wear a matching tweed cap because that makes you look like a keeper.
This is very good advice. That might be the first time this series we've dished out advice.
Oh, sorry. Was I supposed not to be dishing out good advice? I'm familiar with this segment.
No, we like good advice, but you're absolutely on. Can I caveat this whole thing with estate tweeds are definitely not part of this conversation. They are very much acceptable and encouraged. I think that's great. I think it's the sort of Billy Bunting turning up on his own in full head, cap, jacket, trousers, or breeks or whatever, matching tweed is what he's getting at here.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I find myself in a bit of a quandary because I love tweed and I love the idea of having a fully tailored, proper shooting suit. A waistcoat, jacket, coat. Interesting what you say about the hat, and that's an interesting point. But I do also find myself wondering when you see somebody in the full get-up, if their underpants are also made of tweed. And I also take a great pleasure in wearing as many different kinds of tweed as I can on a day. I have been known to wear, 3 or 4 different patterns at the same time, and I like that too.
Yeah.
So I don't quite know which side of this fence I come down on.
Okay, so Barney, if you're going shooting in somewhere else, do you wear the estate tweeds, or do you don something else for the day?
No, I wear estate tweed because I get my. I'm one of these kit nuts. I just love different sorts of shooting kit jackets. So my shooting coats are sort of designed, by me. They've got pockets in the right place, and I'm just so anal about it. So I wear those. And I have to say what I like, just maybe I'm not answering the question in the light-hearted manner I should be, but I like someone who turns up in gaudy tweed because it differentiates them from the other guns who are just wearing the regulation shuffle and wellies. I think there's too many guns just come in rather sort of boring uniform. The Chelsea life jacket, the shuffle jacket over the top, shuffle coat over the top. Someone who's different, someone who's making a bit of an effort. No, I love it. I want more of them on my shoot.
I'm so with you on that, Barney. So with you.
Oh, this is brilliant because this is exactly why this feature has made it into the podcast. He thinks it's an unpopular opinion. He's actually saying that this is his opinion, I think. But the point being that it divides opinion. I know exactly what you mean. It depends what that tweed's like. I don't know if you remember a few years ago, Holland did like a sort of almost black and white houndstooth tweed, which looked like a bit of a tablecloth. Anyway, I bought the breeks. They're pretty obnoxious. And I get all the comments about looking like a chef when I wear the breeks. But if you were seen in the breeks and the coat and the hat, then you would look like, I don't know what they were thinking at that point, but you'd look absolutely ridiculous. So it does depend on the tweed a bit.
I do think that unless you're shooting grouse or maybe like early season partridge to an extent, but I think that the louder the tweed, the better. Really, I like them interesting and colourful.
Can I just add a little adjunct to that? I was talking to the stalker today on the estate, and they have quite an interesting tweed, quite a lot of red in it. And he tells me that it was designed by Coco Chanel, who was having a dalliance with the owner back in the 1920s, and he got her to design the estate tweed. Now, how cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
That's ridiculous. Very cool.
Right, so I think we've come to a pretty solid conclusion there, which is... Actually, I don't know what the solid conclusion is.
We like tweed.
We like tweed. Wear what you want.
The solid conclusion is literally do what you like. That's what makes shooting great. So, yeah.
Great. Okay, so Rudy and Clarence are now members of the most noble order of the Garters, as is Barney, of course, and will shortly be in receipt of their very own set of the Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters, which, of course, go with any tweed.
They do. Well, that's the whole point. They are garish. You won't find a tweed they actually go with.
So, if you two have got an unpopular opinion or a shooting confession, quandary, or query that you'd like us and our guests to help you with, and you want a set of garters, drop us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com. And if we read it out in one of the future episodes, you'll get some garters. It's interesting that you've gone click there, because on my running order here, it says drinks refill.
It's just psychological, psychotic, no, whatever it is. Anyway,
I'm going to drain the rest of this slow gin neat, because I haven't got another tonic with me, into my glass and just drink it neat now, George. Enjoy it as it was supposed to be enjoyed.
And I'm going to get into my beer in a minute when I've finished off the last of this slow gin. Right, so Barney, we've got you on because you know about partridges, and I have a bit of a think before we do these recordings about things that we'd maybe like to ask. And the first thing I wrote down is I don't really have any questions. I just want to talk about how much I love partridge shooting. But then I gave it a bit more thought, and I thought, so I think one of the reasons I love partridge shooting is that when it comes to driven shooting in much of the country, partridge shooting was really the mainstay until people learned how to rear pheasants effectively and so on. But in this year's game shooting census, we asked people which they prefer, partridge or pheasant shooting, and the result was about 70-30 in favour of pheasants. So the question I have for you is, do you think that people don't give partridge shooting the respect that it deserves?
Well, I mean, I suppose they probably don't. I think one observation I would make is that there, and I don't want to come over as being a bit arrogant here, but it's quite hard to do. You need the right country, the right topography, the right drives to show partridges well. They don't necessarily show themselves well in the wrong environment. So, maybe that's why a lot of people have not experienced good, should we say good or fun partridge shooting. There are lots of different ways of doing it, but if you're just putting a few in with some pheasants, or you just have blocks of game crop and you've got some rather tame birds that just get up at the end of the drive in one huge lot and sort of swoop over the guns, that mightn't be that exciting. But I think if you do it well, and you put a bit of effort in to presenting the birds well, which is they are just the most amazing flyers when they're given the chance, then I think it really does. They show themselves really well and present really exciting shooting.
We're definitely seeing a lot more mixed days, pheasant and partridge bags on shoots than we used to see. A shoot would either be, we just see a lot more straight pheasant shoots with no partridges, but a lot of those shoots seem to be putting down a few partridges in amongst the pheasants. But I suppose what we're getting at here is September, just straight partridge days. And that's where we definitely see less demand on Guns on Pegs for that sort of stuff than you do for a January pheasant day. But I think the sort of September partridge day needs to be thought of totally differently to sort of partridge shooting where you shoot a few partridges on an actual day. And that's the bit that I just, when you're on it, and it's at a time of year where you can't shoot pheasants, it's just absolutely awesome. And in the sort of topography that you're talking about and where you are, Barney, that's the bit I think is just absolutely awesome. I just don't think enough people actually even do it or give it a chance.
Do you know, Chris, it's really interesting. When I first started doing commercial days 20 plus years ago, we were just starting to do on the family days some, partridge drive, with the red legs, So this was sort of mid-90s we sort of started doing it, and they were sort of good fun. And when I started doing it commercially, I just could not get anyone to come shooting in September. Clearly we had, a lot of, dates that we could have shot. But everybody wanted to come when when the clocks have gone back, when there's a bit of frost on the ground and all this sort of stuff. And what we get now are people who just love the different type of shooting that you get with partridges, particularly September, October. You can do it in shirt sleeves. We have lunch. One of the things we developed early on was we do lunch up on top of the hill. So even if the weather's a bit iffy, we've got all the facilities that enable that and do it comfortably. People just absolutely love that sort of part of it. And, these birds go from a really, maybe the first couple of times through, they need a bit of educating, but they learn really quickly. And I think a lot quicker than pheasants. So, by week 2 of the season, they're all flying really, well. I mean, they're coming over in sufficiently big numbers that you can pick and choose. There will be, high birds, medium birds, or if you're having a poor time or you quite like that stuff, there are always, a few lower ones. But, they fly so well from the off, so that, they make such sporting quarry. And, the other fun thing about it is when you get the big lots of partridges, coming over, as they do, it does take a bit of while for them to get a bit split up. But you get these big lots, and it's intimidating. We had a novice gun once who, we had a minder looking after him on an early September day, and you've got these big lots coming over, and he just couldn't get his gun off. There were just so many coming, and he said it's like driving into an empty car park and trying to find or decide on which slot to park it. And we all do it, don't we? We end up parking miles away from the exit. And so, that is the sort of, that really gets your blood going. It's not like it's, okay, we all like the single high solitary cock pheasant coming out with everyone watching. Yeah, that's a, great sort of shooting phenomenon. But, coveys of partridges coming, you've got to pick your bird. This beautiful sunshine. Everyone's relaxed. A lot of cold beers at 11s. It's just a brilliant day out.
So I think you stumbled across something here, because what you're saying is that you've got a lot of guns who come to shoot with you who love September partridge shooting, but you didn't at the start. And there's a lot of other guns that go to some very well-known shoots for September partridge shooting. But what I'm saying is, when we look at it on a data level on Guns on Pegs, with masses of people, it's still not that much demand. So what I think's happened is that when they've had really good times and people like you have sort of drawn them into this and got them excited about it, they end up loving it. So essentially what I'm saying is, I think there's a lot more people out there who don't realise how much they'd love it if they went and did it.
Absolutely. And as a slight aside, I think it's a bit like, the simulated game days. I'm going off piece, but it's a similar thing. A lot of people, when they just don't realise how much they enjoy it until they come and do it. And I think that,
so true.
Everyone thinks it's all about pheasants, but it ain't. There's clays, there's partridges, there's loads of ways of having fun.
And I think one of the other things that maybe people don't realise is that, when you see some partridges coming through in a mixed drive, it's very easy to sort of just think, oh, well, it's basically just a smaller pheasant. But actually, partridge shooting is a completely different beast. So given that there are probably some people going out in the next month or so on their first ever partridge day who've maybe done a fair amount of pheasant shooting and shot the odd partridge here and there as part of a mixed day, what would you say the specific challenges for anybody heading out on a proper partridge day are for the first time?
The car park scenario has got to feature again. I thought that was absolutely...
Yes, I mean, I think there's that. And there's something else that, it's, with partridges too, in the old days, we shot them over hedgerows. You probably still do in on your place, George, I imagine. That's a great way, and it's a great fun way to do it. And the fun there is to slightly, because they don't necessarily fly as high as pheasants. There are some, partridge shoots that show very extreme partridges. That's great. But, they don't fly as high. People are prepared to shoot them lower, generally, than pheasants, because traditionally that is how it was done. But I think that, if you are one of these people who's just worried about how high the bird is and you only want to shoot stuff above 40 yards or, you've got your sort of set parameters about high bird, I think the fun thing about partridges, but I've sort of slightly bent people's ear in the past when, it's a bit of a flat, warm day and they're not zipping like they could do if there's a bit of wind. I say you've got plenty of time to shoot them well out in front. And the good shot is not the one who can shoot a 40-yard partridge over his head. It's the guy who can get a right and left and land them in front, because that's how it used to be done in the old days. And people just get too constipated. They just can't see that is a fun way to shoot partridges. And whether you're in Hampshire and you've got your barrels resting on the top of the hedge and you resolve not to shoot behind, you just going to say, I'm only going to shoot them in front. Even in our Wiltshire Downs, it's a quarry that you can shoot much more like grouse, and test yourself against that. Good guns will be able to get that right and left and land in front. They can also shoot the high birds overhead. Don't just be the sort of guy who only will shoot that type of shot. Experiment. And particularly if you've got bigger groups, packed together, you can shoot wide ones. There's so many different. It's not like your neighbour and you have got to sort out whose bird is it. Whose bird is it anyway? Ho ho. You've got in the coveys a lot more different types of shot if you choose to take them.
Yeah, I tell you what, I've got an aim for this season now, which is right and left, land them in front. That is
But it's easy to see why, if you only really shoot pheasants, and the majority of people who go shooting really only shoot pheasants, predominantly anyway, that if you then do go on a partridge day, it's kind of like when you go on a grouse day for the first time, you're like, do you really want me to shoot in the floor out in front? It's alien, isn't it? The first time you do that. And so to come to a partridge day and then shoot in a different style, it's the same scenario. You're just not really used to doing it. So if you've been lucky enough to shoot throughout August and then you rock up to a partridge day in September, you're going to be shooting right and left out in front because it's second nature. But if you only ever shoot sort of 40-yard pheasants over your head, it's definitely going to be a challenge that you're going to struggle with.
Yeah,
definitely. I also think that partridges are deceptive, aren't they? Because they look fast, but aren't necessarily as quick as a pheasant.
Okay.
And
now I'm just I think that is a slight canard. I've watched lots of drives with pheasants and partridges going at the same time, and I would say they fly at the same speed. I think it's a myth.
Okay, I will bow to your superior knowledge on that.
Yeah, I think it's a myth. What I find interesting is when I'm on a sort of mixed drive and the partridges come through and they're quite zippy, and you're sort of. It energizes you. Your swing is more active. Your mind is more cottoned on and locked on, I should say, to them. And then you get this pheasant come lumbering, you've got the Spitfires, now you've got the Blenheim Format. And you think, oh, God, I've been nailing these zippy partridges. This is going to be just too easy. And two barrels go off and it lumbers off, maybe with a twitch of the tail. Because people think that the pheasant, is slow, whereas actually, relative to the partridge, it's quite, it's the same speed. So we actually find when we're doing mixed drives, sort of November, on December, the partridges are all zipping, the guns are all tuned to that, and you get the pheasants at the end. They can't hit the pheasants. They sort of, even though they think they're easier targets, actually to be able to switch from one to the other is quite a skill. Do
you think that when a partridge is flapping away like mad, it makes you think it's much faster, so you swing faster, you maybe shoot better on partridges? I'm saying this because this is what I think happens to me. But I just think that because of that nature, you actually do what you're supposed to, and you end up shooting better on partridges than you do on pheasants. Because too many people line up with a pheasant like that, as exactly as you say. Just go, oh, this is doing all right, and then miss behind, always.
There's definitely something about that kind of noise that their wings make that makes my heart go all funny.
Gets me so excited talking about it. Especially after last year, it was so crap. It was like so quiet. I mean, obviously quieter for you, but I mean, than a normal season, Barney. But for those of us that don't shoot quite as much as you do, I didn't get out enough, and you get even more excited about talking about it now.
I mean, actually, interestingly, because we started, 1st of September, that we got September and October on the partridges. Okay, we missed November. We don't shoot much in January because our partridges are, certainly commercially, our partridges, are, we don't know what we'll have left. So. I mean, actually, last year, if you've come partridge shooting, in September or October, you would have had a lot more of your season. bizarrely.
Yeah, that's true, actually.
So, question for people again, for the people who are maybe heading out on their first sort of partridge only day. What load would you recommend? Cartridge load would you recommend for good but not extreme partridge shooting?
Oh God, George.
You said you like kit.
I am not the person. I mean, look, 28 grams of 6, 30 grams of 6. You certainly don't need anything more. You don't want to be blowing them up. I mean, I personally I've started quite like shooting with small balls. So first last year I used a 410, which was great for the first. We have quite a few family days just to kick things off, get everybody in the swing. And I love using a 410, and it worked really well. And then when they got flying a little bit better by mid-September into October, I got horribly shown up. So I sort of might go to something a bit stronger. But so I'm just going to try a 28 ball this year. So actually, it's quite good fun, again, to go down a ball or size, or even right down a ball size. So a 410 will kill a partridge, absolutely, absolutely fine. So you can sort of, play around and have a bit of fun on that score if that's how that's your game.
It's an interesting angle there. I think certainly with partridges, I find that without sort of getting gory about killing, but I do find that because it's a sort of not quite as big a bird, not quite as beefy as a pheasant, you don't prick as many. They end up sort of folding up quite nicely. It makes you sort of feel better about your shooting compared to pheasant shooting sometimes. And I suppose that lends itself to a smaller bore as well. In that you're not sort of doing as much damage and you'll pull them down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things again about shooting partridges, you say that maybe slightly going back to the previous question, that because you're pretty much just shooting, there's one body, as it were. With a pheasant, you've got the head, you've got the wings, you've got the body. You end up sort of shooting at the back part. Your eye, I should say, instinctively picks up the back part of a pheasant. And that is where you will sort of tend to be trying to shoot them. Whereas, you should be just concentrating on the head. And then if you're slightly behind, well, it doesn't matter. It's still going into the body. Partridges, to your point, Chris, it's a much more compact thing. And that is what you focus on. Your mind is just totally focused on that shall we say, killing zone. And therefore, you're much better able to get the shot onto it. You're not distracted by a long tail and wings and others. It's more like a clay pigeon in that respect.
I'm glad you said 28 gram 6 as well. I'm with you on that. In case anyone was wondering. So, have you shot partridges abroad? Have you done the whole sort of Spain, Morocco, that sort of area?
Yes, partridges. I go to Spain pretty much every year. I had a great friend, Javier. I won't even try and pronounce his surname. He was actually coming over to shoot with me on the 2nd. Who, when they started bringing the Spanish partridges over to the UK for the first time, he was the sort of front man. And I'm trying to think when that was. Probably 10 years ago. And we got chatting, and I said I'd always love to go and shoot to Spain. I'd look around Spanish shoots, and the problem with Spanish shoots is the numbers are too big. They start at 400, 500, and dare I say it, they are pretty rapacious at overage. I mean, there is no mercy. Not only do you pay individually for every bird over your 40 or 50 or 80 or whatever it is, your allocator of the day, but your secretario is counting it, and there's no way out, and they'll just keep flooding these birds over till you're sort of bankrupt. And Javier, I said this to him, and I said, and he said, well, I actually run a shoot, and we will do smaller days. And we'll do it English style too if you want to shoot good birds. And so I started taking a day with him every year, and we would do 200, 250, and he would do a mixture of higher drives, or he'd do what he called Spanish drives, where they shoot them more like grouse. And the first year I went out, I invited a bunch of friends who got sort of shoots in Exmoor, and we never have a chance to get together in our game season. So going out in February was just brilliant. And I was really worried that, they would only shoot at the really high stuff. They loved the more, what he calls the traditional drives, where, they came at you like grouse and you sort of shot into the ground in front of you. Because it's a, very testing, challenging target. And, we could do decent bags, no overage. These Spanish birds, I have to say, it's a whole different topic. I don't think we've really got time to cover, but I think they fly fantastically well. They're a sort of slightly different bird to the ones we get from the French game farms. But, they've got, we used to have them at Stockton. But the transport.
You don't put down Spanish partridges anymore? Because I've seen them on...
No, I miss them, but... we could only buy them as poults, and our whole system is reared to doing our own.
Okay.
And they were just, post-Brexit and the pound crashing, they became really expensive. And to be honest, not enough of our guns noticed the difference. I did, the keepers did, but it was just too expensive our diversions. But going back to the Spanish shooting sheet, I love it, and they do it incredibly well. And even if you go, I've been slightly sort of dismissive about the sort of the bigger shoots, but if you've got the budget, it's just brilliant shooting. They do it really, the whole thing so well. It's just such a great day out. The weather's usually great, the food's fantastic. They have some great drives, and so I've done it there. I haven't been to Morocco. I think that's I might plead the fifth on how that works. But, I think the thing about Spain, is they have lots of different practices there. So, it's well worth getting. That's why I'm so fortunate with Javier, because we talk a lot about how you manage the shooting, how you release. Of course, there's different releasing practices there that, you wouldn't be allowed to do in the UK, or you shouldn't be doing in the UK, shall we say. And some shoots are more conservative about that than others. So, you've sort of got to know whether they're going to be coming out of boxes, whether they were released the week before or 2 months before.
Yeah, and they do vary hugely. They seem to be a bit more open about it now. They'll say, more like a traditional English shoot when they're sort of telling you about it. But I think I think when they say released partridges, what they often mean is released the day before, not out of a box, which is the difference between our released, which is released a few months before, which is quite different. So just a little tip to look out for there. I'll keep asking questions if you're unsure.
Are you going to have a special section on the Guns on Pegs Spanish shooting page for the different categories, the releasing policy?
Well, and as you say, like, these guys think it's perfectly normal. It's fine. It's just the way we've always done it. Whereas we turn our nose up instantly at that as a concept. Just because that's the way we don't do it, which is, again, interesting in its own right.
The number of conversations I've had about topping up, and I won't bore you with all of them, but, I've had the odd person talk about shoot, shall we say, fairly well known for doing it. And they say, well, of course, I'm never going to go there. It's English shoots. And I say, well, of course, fine, I'm fighting, I'm not going there. And then I say... And of course, if you ever got invited shooting in Spain, you would turn it down, wouldn't you? And they go, well, no, of course I wouldn't. Why would I do that? And I say, well...
There you go.
But Barney, you sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of the releasing side of things. But we, on our family shoot at home, we made the switch to focus on partridges a few years back. And it's been fantastic for our little family shoot. But I also know that the challenges of looking after partridges are quite different from looking after pheasants. So for anybody who's not sort of familiar with the management of a partridge shoot, what are the challenges of running a shoot like Stockton, both in terms of like the pre-season stuff, but then also on the day?
Yeah, no, good question, George. I think the most critical thing we've found is that you need to know which part of your shoot, if any, they like to stay on. So we shoot over 6,500 acres, as Chris said, at Stockton. We know that one beat of that, they just don't really like. They never have. We can't really work it out why. My father said in the days of wild partridges graze, they never did as well on that side of the valley. The north-facing south side. Looks the same to me. But we know on the north side, south facing, all the farms down there, the partridge just hold. We put them out in August, they'll still be there in January if they're not shot. So once you sort of have confidence that your ground that well, then actually the releasing is it's so simple. I mean, I'm actually increasingly moving away from releasing pheasants. I mean, to release 1,000 pheasants, you need, you've got your release pen. It costs a fortune to put up. Your keeper then has to go there morning, dawn and dusk for 6 weeks, from end of June to middle of August, going around the pen, putting the birds in. As soon as you let them out, they all seem to bugger off. Partridges, you put up some sections. You put one, you put one lot in there for 2 or 3 nights. You open it up, let them out. You can then maybe come back a week later. You put another 1,000 in there. Open up the pen the next night. The others are still hanging around. Boom, they're off. They're out of the pen. Okay, you've got to have. We need to put watering and feeding stations down the maize, or the game crop, which is almost always maize. And then they're out. They're going. They're released. Infinitely easier than pheasants. I mean, the one problem you can have, and we're obviously finding it this season, is with your harvest, because obviously we are releasing on the side of the, on the edge of arable fields. We don't have grass, and in fact, they probably don't do that very. They don't particularly like grass, in my opinion. I think they do better on arable farms, but others might have a different experience. So this year we are, it's all going to be a little bit later because harvest is later. And we're just going to have to work around that. It might be we don't shoot some drives for, the first part of September until they've had enough time to settle down. But once you've got them out, they look after themselves much better than pheasants. I find driving them, it's a different challenge. It's a lot. You need to have keepers who really know how to drive them. Once you've driven them a couple of times, they get really wild. And by October, certainly into November, the beaters are not allowed to have orange flags. They're not allowed to crack them. They're not allowed to make any noise. You've got to have various parts of the line appearing over the skyline at absolutely predetermined times so that you don't spook them and send them back. I mean, they're an incredibly game bird at the way they fly. They sort of get wild infinitely quicker than pheasants. So you've got to sort of get that sort of knowledge of how to drive them worked out amongst your beating team, because to optimize them. They are more influenced by the wind. So we just look. All we're interested when we're looking at a weather forecast is what's the wind strength and direction for the week ahead, and that determines which drives we can do. You can't drive them to any good effect into the wind. So you've got to have the wind across. You might be able to get the odd return drive coming back into the wind, but the wind is critical. And one thing that we never have fixed pegs on our shoot. So I will put the guns out for every drive, depending on how I see the wind taking them. And it could be, a couple of 100 yards different, depending on wind direction and strength. You've got to have that sort of innate knowledge and feel as to how the drive is going to go on that wind on that day. I find it is so much more exciting to me as a host to put on a good partridge drive on a windy day than it is a pheasant drive. Because, the pheasants will fly pretty much the same route. They're going to go to where they want to go to. Partridges will just take the wind and go, and they don't really care where they land. I'm probably not answering. I'm off on a ramble here, George. So you can always edit it out. I'm not answering your question, but I mean, it's a fascinating part of it that you can drive them off, the edge of farm, over a river, over a road. They don't care because they're birds that will fly back to the drive. They're birds that fly. Okay, so pheasants only fly as a last resort sort of defense mechanism. And each time they fly, they have an attack of PTSD and they need counseling. And it takes them, weeks or days to get back into that wood. And you can only probably fly them, 5, 6, 10 times in the season before they either get tired or bugger off. Partridges, you can, they don't mind where they land. They'll let the wind just take them, because it's a matter of moments to fly back to where they want to be. So you've got to realize that that's how they work, and you've got to sort of put your guns, in the right place accordingly. Otherwise, you can get caught out. I've forgotten what your question was.
Well, I think you've answered it brilliantly, because actually, everything you said rings true to how things go at home. And one of the things that I think makes them such an interesting quarry is the fact that they can be influenced by the wind, and that they're very rarely flying in a straight line. Even if they're curling, they're very rarely flying in a sort of steady curve. They jink and they dart, and it can be completely different on 2 different days, and you can shoot the same drive 3 or 4 times, and you get a completely different experience every time.
It did make me laugh when I was driving back down to home before recording this. I was coming down the M11, and a pair flew straight across the M11 as I was there. Lorries and everything didn't seem to mind going back to wherever their home is for them. Quite amazing.
Oh yeah, back in the day at home when the shoot was run on a much grander scale, they used to shoot sort of 200 odd. There was a drive where they would drive them over the A34.
Really?
From one side to the other, yeah.
It's fascinating what you were just talking about, Barney, because it reminds me back to the days sort of pre-Guns on Pegs. The shoot that kicked off Guns on Pegs, that made it all happen, was a Partridge shoot in just outside Cambridge. And the sort of wind you're talking about, it caused havoc. But actually what we found there was, because it was totally flat, it was the supreme high-pressure days that with the sun that caused more trouble. But you're blessed with a bit more topography, so you can sort of get them off the ground a bit, I think. But that was always really tricky. But then also the management side as well. You'd lose lots of partridges to being hoovered up for whatever vegetable crop they were doing the middle of the night before without telling you, which you just don't have with pheasants. But I was fascinated that you found, on the whole, many advantages over pheasants. I wasn't expecting you to say that.
I mean, actually, one thing I forgot to say on the management side, it's very interesting, is, and you touched on it with the cropping, is for us, cropping really makes a difference. What winter crop you have really determines where the partridges live. So if you have stubble, that's optimal. Stubble is number one. Yeah. Now they're doing this greening, vetches and stuff. That's done lightly through the stubble. It's just fantastic. They love it. Rape, they like second best, although they will bloody eat it at this time of year, just it's coming up. Winter corn, they don't like. Grass, I don't think they're particularly keen on. And so every year, your drives will vary depending on what crop is alongside the drive as to how long they will last through the season. So we look at the cropping plan that farm produce, and we know what sort of season we're going to have, or which drive is going to work well, through into December and January. But in terms of of partridges against pheasants, I mean, one of the things we find is that we get a really good return on partridges. I mean, I'm not boasting, bragging, whatever, but we get consistently high 40s return on partridges, even though we do it in quite a big way, and we absolutely are not topping up, just in case anybody thinks. That really helps. Pheasants, it's way it's way below that. So we just find dare I say it, commercially, it's a very different game to a pheasant shoot that is getting sub 30% returns and isn't shooting them until till much later in the season.
It makes all the difference, doesn't it? Your whole approach to partridges in general on your shoot, if you're getting those sorts of returns, you're sort of enjoying it. It becomes much more pleasurable. If you're getting sort of 20% return on your partridges, then you've got to start asking why you're doing it.
Yeah, indeed.
So you've alluded to it once, and we can't sort of go through a whole podcast on partridges and not mention greys, because everything we've talked about to this point is redlegs. But that's, I suppose, mainly because we just don't really see them very often. Do you have any at Stockton?
No.
There you go.
We don't. And in the early days, I tried very hard, and we got the Game Conservancy. Francis Booner was doing his research on how you could foster, chicks raised in captivity onto wild pairs that hadn't bred, and we did all that, and we tried really hard. Unquestionably, I think when you've got a highish volume of red legs, it doesn't help the greys. I think that they just don't take disturbance. You can drive greys once or twice, and when we have had wild coveys, as we did back in the day, you might inadvertently get them into a drive, and they would fly over the guns and probably not even get shot, but you probably wouldn't see them again. And it pained me because obviously it's an iconic bird and and I was somewhat relieved when Mike Swan of the Game Conservancy came round, because I was using him to give me ideas as how we could help on the greys, and he said, look, because our bit of land is quite open downland, it used to be good grey partridge country, but my father planted up a lot of woods and trees. He said, there's just not grey countries anymore. They don't like it where it's too wooded. They like hedgerows. It needs to be, relatively open. So, we don't have wild ones. I have never tried releasing them because all that I hear is that they are not the best. They don't fly very well. And, because they are much more contour huggers than sort of valley crossers, if you know what I mean. And, they don't hold. So we get the odd coveys that come through. A couple of neighbours release them through all good reasons. And we see a few of theirs every year, but they don't hang around. So I think that, in my view, unless you're actually going to have a dedicated grey partridge farm, it's going to be really hard to have them either alongside, a red leg shoot, or to have them as their own, in their own right as a commercial shoot.
There's a whole podcast in greys alone, so I think we'll leave it there. But it's very interestingly put, and I think unfortunately, so many others are seeing the same thing. Obviously, why we don't really see them at all.
Yeah, I mean, I've had the opportunity to shoot greys a few times, and every now and again, like you, Barney, we get a covey or two at home. But just like you, they go over the guns once. People go, "What the hell's that? That's not okay," and they don't get shot at, but we never see them again.
Yeah,
and I think maybe in the last 10 years, I think maybe we've shot one.
Well, I mean, I think you're the exception. In my experience, whenever they fly over, people go, "Oh, what the hell's that?" And they go bang, bang. And having missed everything else, they then get the greys. Always sod's law, isn't it? It's like the grey hen on a grouse drive.
Right, Barney, final question on partridges. Where would you say you've experienced the best partridge drives? And of course, you're allowed to say your own.
But we want others other than your own, obviously. That's the point. Where would you go partridge shooting other than Stockton?
I don't get out much, okay? There is something we might come to on the next sections. So I don't really get the opportunity to go very far afield to shoot partridges. And as much, not because I haven't got any friends, although that is perhaps true, but who own good partridge estates, but I just can't get away in the shooting season. First and foremost. But what I would say, in my opinion, and it is an opinion, there are certain parts of the country that do good partridges, and I think you're pretty much looking at the South Downs. You're looking at our part of southwest Wiltshire. What we call the three. We used to call the three valleys, the chalk valleys. The Nadder, Wiley, and Chalk Valley particularly. Exmoor. They do it well in their own way. Parts of Devon, you've clearly got the Yorkshire, East Riding of Yorkshire, Water Priory, Raisthorpe, they're clearly great, ground for partridges. And then you get up into the borders up into Scotland, up into God, what was the place I drove past yesterday going to Inverness Airport? Calder. They have great partridge shooting on the moorland edge. If you want to go and shoot high partridges, go and do it there. And I'm probably missed somewhere, so there'll probably going to be lots of angry responses saying, "Oh, you missed, Rutland," and so what I would also say, what I haven't missed, and I'm going to come back to, is East Anglia and Hampshire, which I would say, I think a lot of guns in a commercial level, George, I don't know what you think, or Chris, what you think, because obviously you have more experience of it, but I think, people have slightly moved away from shooting partridges over hedges, my opinion. You know, tell me what you think. You know, because you can go and shoot slightly higher ones, you know, off the downs. And I think that's a mistake because, as we said earlier, I think you can have great fun shooting partridges over hedges.
You can.
Well, you've made me very happy because my dad is a Hampshire, Wiltshire lad, and my mum's from Norfolk, and so most of my shooting has been in those two places, and that's where my love of partridge shooting comes from, I think. And yeah, mostly, you know, over high hedges or shelter belts.
We still see huge demand for partridges, well, general East Anglia shooting, but so much partridge shooting. And I think part of it is because those shoots are per bird a little bit cheaper, which draws the attention in at the start. But there's still a lot of people going to do that. But and yes, they have. You know, there is a demand for all the high stuff, or for maybe better, you know, higher birds than the hedgehoppers, as it were. The traditional partridge shooting, I think, is the way we always refer to it as. But there's still a lot of people that do it. And I think if I remember rightly, East Anglia is still the third most searched area on Guns on Pegs regionally out the UK, which amazes me every time.
In a good way.
Yeah, but because you expect people to want, you know, the topography of all the other areas that you just mentioned. So, okay, the last section, one last day, where would it be? Obviously, you don't get a chance to get out much, so I think I know what's coming here. But one last day, where would it be? Who'd you go with? What tweaks would you make to the normal day that you usually have for your desert island shooting?
I just don't get to travel around the country and do the different sorts of shooting that, you know, that you do, Chris. And every time I listen to this podcast, you go, oh, yeah, God, do you remember that amazing day we had in Lancashire? And, oh, do you remember that amazing day we had in Devon? And, oh, remember that day in Scotland? I'm thinking, you know.
How do you think I feel? I have to listen to it every week.
You and I both. So, you know, I mean, as much as I love driven grouse shooting, you know, it's just so special. I do a day's driven boar shooting in Germany. I just love that too when something happens. But I just don't have much of a chance to experience shooting around the country. You know, I get quite a few really good invitations, which I turn down because, you know, I just have to be, you know, at home hosting, and that's my job, and, you know, that's the penance. So most of my shooting is just with, you know, local friends who I've always shot with in, you know, normally in January when the pressure is off. And as much as I like that, you know, I am coming back inevitably to shooting at home. And, you know, and I just love running family days at home. I love what I've done with our shoot. I love, you know, the drives that we can put on. I just love being out there, and particularly when it's a family environment. You know, I've got 2 sons. I've got 4 brothers. You know, they've got 8 children. So, you know, we fill the line before we even start. So quite a lot of our days around Christmas, we'll have 20 guns. And, you know, it's just great laugh getting everybody in, you know, under some birds. And we can do it. I think it's one of the supreme challenges of the day. But, you know, if it was my last day, you know, it would be a slightly more select team of guns. So, you know, having 20 is great, but I am totally exhausted by the end of the day. And, you know, and we would do all the drives I wanted to do, you know, that worked at that time of year. And, you know, September, October, when we've got partridges, would be different drives to what we have in December, January. So it slightly depends on the time of year. But, you know, as you guys have often said, you know, what is great fun is when you have a weekend party and, you know, you have your best mates who just really chill and relax and enjoy it. And, you know, I'm slightly digressing here, but it's one of the things that I always, you know, with my children, when they started shooting a few years ago, I got a game book for them each. And I wrote in the front a little homily. And the first thing I said is, when you go shooting, the most important thing is to make sure your host has a good day, i.e. you have got to be a good guest. You have got to be good fun. You've got to be the life and soul of the party. You've got to make sure your host is just having a laugh. So I would, apart from, you know, my children who are great fun to shoot with, and maybe some brothers, you know, I would get, you know, 7 friends who work to that principle, that they are there to make my life my day good fun. I would never put myself at the middle of the line. I just don't. I don't enjoy that. I like going on the edge. I mean, there is an adage that I think David Hitchings at Gerson Dan came up with, that shooting your birds is a bit like kissing your sister. Even though I don't have a sister, I can sort of imagine what the sentiment is like. So I feel a bit guilty being in the middle of the line on my own shoot. Shooting lots of birds. I love being on the edge. So I can watch what others are doing, but still pick off the ones that have irritated me all season by trying to squeeze out the side. That's what I love. And so really, yeah, that it's not particularly imaginative. It's not very different, but I've thought about this quite a lot. And whenever I've listened to your podcasts, and you've had others giving either the saying this, I thought quite long and hard, and that's exactly where I come back to. There is just nothing nicer than shooting, with the keepers all knowing it's a special day, the pickers up, the game cart guys, just everybody, with a smile, just wanting everyone to have a laugh. I just can't think of any nicer way to spend a day.
Hear. And what a great piece of advice as well for a young gun. I love that. Yeah. I'm going to remember that.
Not just a young gun, George.
Yeah.
I think there are quite a few old guns who could learn that.
Well, yes.
It's so good. We're on about 2/3 to 1/3. 2/3 of people who've chosen the shoot that they actually just do at home or most often as their desert island shooting, which is so lovely because it means that the best is what you've kind of already got, and then you've got the other third who go absolutely ridiculous, which is also good fun to listen to. But lovely.
Yeah, Barney, thank you so much for joining us. It has been really interesting, and as I said at the top of the show, this is a subject really dear to my heart, and it's been really great having you on to talk about it. I hope that everybody who's been listening has enjoyed it as well, and that those people who haven't been out on a proper Partridge day feel inspired to go and do so, and give the partridge the love that I think it deserves. So before we go, as per usual, there's one final reminder that you can get your hands on a pair of the very exclusive Guns on Pegs podcast shooting sock garters by sending us your shooting dilemmas for us to resolve, or by getting in touch to let us know where you've been listening, or by sending us your unpopular opinions. Just send us an email to pod@gunsonpegs.com, and if we read it out in the next episode, we'll send you some garters. We'll be back in a couple of weeks' time with another episode. Until then, thanks very much for listening, and goodbye.
Wow.